Okay, Framar, do you want to kick it off?
Yes, I will. Thank
you.
you everyone for joining us this evening. This is our final presentation for our 9-part series of the GP Train Our Certifying Physicians. So welcome very much to our presentation. Michelle's going to do a little intro about the Apothecarium, and then we're going to introduce you to TJ from Farmaceutical Rx, one of our favorite GPs here at the Apothecarium. So Michelle, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. And yes, thank you again, TJ, for joining us. We're really excited to have Farmaceutical Rx here to talk a little bit about their organization and their products. But before I turn it over to TJ, just want to talk a little bit about the Apothecarium. And I know the physicians who have been on this every week are probably sick of hearing me talk about this, but I'll make it quick. The Apothecarium was founded in 2011 by a gentleman named Brian Hudson from San Francisco. And his aim was really to build a dispensary that people could be comfortable enough to bring their parents. And the goal of the Apothecarium is really to put first-time visitors at ease with a beautiful atmosphere and a very friendly and knowledgeable staff, people like Franmar. The Apothecarium is a full-service award-winning dispensary. We have locations on the West Coast in California and Nevada. We have 3 locations in Pennsylvania, Plymouth Meeting, Thorndale, and Lancaster. And we have 2 other locations in New Jersey, in the northern part of the state, one in Phillipsburg and one in Maplewood. And we will be opening a 3rd location in northern New Jersey in the 3rd quarter of this year. So our mission is to really provide patients with quality medical marijuana in a welcoming environment with empathy, education, and ongoing support. And what makes us different from some of the other dispensaries out there is that we are vertically integrated, we're very medically focused, and we're very patient and physician focused. We offer many education sessions for both patients and physicians, and we're really excited tonight to bring you TJ from Farmaceutical Rx. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let TJ share his and introduce himself and take it away.
Well, thank you, Michelle and Franmar, first and foremost, for doing this. This is the first doctor-related education that I've been able to do, so I'm very pleased to be able to do so. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time to spend with us. I'm not going to lie, my education tends to take around 45 minutes, so it's going to be a little long one, but we have a lot of in-depth things to talk about. So I'm just going to share my screen with my PowerPoint real quick, and we'll dive right into it. All right, if I can, there we go. Okay.
And while TJ's getting that up and running, if anybody has any questions throughout the presentation, please utilize the chat or the Q&A, and Franmar and I will facilitate those at the end for you.
Awesome. So do you see the very first slide up here? Just making sure.
Yes.
All right.
It looks good, and it's on the full screen. It looks fantastic.
Great. Well, I will give you guys a little bit of background of who I am. I'm TJ Kroll. I am Farmaceutical Rx's brand ambassador. I do sales and marketing for the company. I originally started at Salivo Wellness, the first dispensary in Pittsburgh when they opened, as their head of inventory and purchasing. Was with them for about 2 years and moved on to manage the Delta 9 dispensaries on the west side of the state as well, before joining Farmaceutical Rx, in which they offered me a position I just could not refuse. So I'm very happy to be here to talk to you guys about some more organic methodology when it comes to growing this medicine, this cannabis. We definitely believe in, conscious forms of growing, and that's what we're going to learn about tonight. So let's get right into it. Who we are as a company: we were the first of the phase 2 grows here in Pennsylvania, and we're located up in Farrell, Pennsylvania, which is right on the border of Ohio, about an hour 20 north of Pittsburgh, an hour 20 south of Erie. So I'm over here in Philly today, kind of out of my domain, but we are located again in Farrell, which is in Hermitage. with a population of about 4,640 people. We renovated an old steel mill there, which is really cool because, we reinvested into existing infrastructure, into an economy and a location in their industrial complex, which you don't see all the time, but I always personally, subjectively love seeing when people are renovating existing buildings. Of course, we are generator backed, and we are currently right now in PA looking to be expanding about 40%, hopefully, probably not this year, but maybe in 2022. Currently, we also have a vertical license in Ohio. So we have a dispensary that's been operating in East Liverpool, Ohio for about 2 years now. We're just about to come to market with our grow in Ohio. We're probably 2 or 3 months away from getting some seeds in the soil. But we'll be coming to market hopefully in the next few months as well. But what we're working with here in Pennsylvania is a 42,000 square foot facility. It's 2 buildings connected by a bay. We have our cultivation facility, which consists of 20,000 square feet, 2 bedrooms, each about 4,000, or excuse me, combined about 4,000 square feet. We have 7 flower rooms. And we at one point had a lab set up that we were going to be working more closely with Penn State. Things have changed a little bit since then. And we have taken that lab and been able to transform it into some great R&D rooms per se. We have 8 100 square foot rooms for pheno hunting, testing new growing philosophies and methodologies. And we even put our clone rooms into one of those, using one of those rooms as a clone room. It's really cool because at the moment we're testing a few different rooms with LED lights, plasma lights. We typically grow with HPSs in our flowering room, but at the moment we've had a few strains that have yield and tested a little bit better under LEDs. So it's nice to have a little bit of square footage to play around, as I think that's the whole point of growing cannabis. And as we start to learn more about what we're doing organically, R&Ding is always going to be part of this process, and to be able to have that space, is priceless. We also have a 95% clone success rate. That's extremely good. It's very difficult to get 100%. There are very limited grows across the country, maybe even considering the world, that are able to do 100%. So 95 is really solid. Inside that cultivation facility of the 20,000 square foot, we're only working with about 13,000 square feet being canopy. So that's going to be the rooms that are allowing the plants to mature to their best ability, their flowering cycle, of course. And the rest is the 22,000 square feet that is harvest and processing. It's very interesting because we have the 2 separate buildings connected by a bay, and the management offices are all the way back. And when we are harvesting our plants, it's funny, as we have a lot of people in upper management who aren't necessarily patients, maybe they don't really use cannabis, but our plants are so fruitful with the terpenes and the smells that they put off, that even some of our upper management are able to tell when the honey's being harvested or when the East Coast sour diesel is being harvested, because it just smells the whole building up. But with only that much square footage for canopy grow, that puts us in contention of being the smallest grow in the state right now. And as we dive deeper into this, you guys are going to understand that we are growing for quality over quantity. So there are a lot of grows in the state that are definitely much, much bigger than us, that are more focused on quantity over quality. There's no wrong way to grow cannabis, but there are healthier and more sustainable methods. And as we dive into this, that's what you're going to be learning about what we're doing here at Farmaceutical Rx. Start with the products that we are offering at the moment in the market. We do cartridges at 500 milligrams, half-gram cartridges. We do 4 different kinds. We have our burst line, which is going to be a distillate base reintroduced with botanical terpenes or non-cannabis derived terpenes. We'll also have our Delta 8 and our Delta 9. These will be distillate as well, but they will be reintroduced with our live terpenes. And of course, we have our true live resin. And everything over here, we will be getting much more in depth as we go through the presentation. But concentrates, we do half grams and full grams. Right now, we're doing a lot more full grams than half grams. It's just been the change of the times with us. We do cured resins and live resins. We also do flour. We do a 1/8 amount, a 3.5 gram amount. Very rarely, but still we do offer some small buds and rough cuts that are a little bit of a different wholesale. You will probably hear and learn that we are the highest priced most of the time across the board. Most of our products are the highest price. There's a few like our tinctures and RSO that are pretty competitively priced, but our flower can be found in the market anywhere between $60 to $75, depending on the dispensary. We are also doing tinctures, 300 milligrams. We do a CBD, a Delta 8, and we're right now mostly focused on doing strain-specific tinctures. We are also starting to come out with 500 milligrams as well at a little bit of a different price point. And of course, we do RSO. We do full gram RSO that comes in a syringe that is for oral usage. We do strain specifics and some strain mixtures with that. And we have potential of coming to market with RSO capsules here pretty soon. I will also mention that we just popped 4 new strains in preparation for a solventless program, which solventless concentrates are going to be using no solvents, obviously. But the 4 strains that we did pop in preparation are a dub breath, a papaya wasca, a Nilla wafer, and an orange cookies. So we have a few new genetics that are going to be coming to market from us here in the next few months as well. All right, let's dive into the good stuff. Why are patients paying a premium price for our products on the market? Well, it's going to start here. It's the fact that we are doing living soil. Right now, we are the only ones in the state that is following a fully or mostly fully organic model. Like I said, there's no wrong way to grow cannabis, but there are healthier ways, more sustainable ways. And a lot of the other grows might have some organic methodologies thrown in with what they're doing overall, but not totally being able to consider themselves organic. So what we're really trying to do here is mimic nature to the best of our abilities. We feed our plants a plethora of organic nutrients, and this is going to start in the soil, where we will go through the nutrients here in just a second. But really, the whole point is by mimicking nature and giving them this availability through the probiotic teas that we feed through the watering cycle, through the amount of nutrients that we have in the soil naturally. We believe in free will of our plants. So they choose what they want to feed upon rather than force feeding. And you might find more force feeding in a hydro model, not necessarily a cocoa model, but more so in a hydro, and force feeding being me as a human telling the plant what I believe the plant wants rather than letting the plant choose for itself. And usually when you're doing that, you might be aiming for more of a quantity type of a grow, more higher in maybe cannabinoids and more specifically THC. We are very focused on trying to produce the most well-rounded medicine that you possibly can. And that's going to be focusing on the terpenes, the cannabinoids in total, and just giving more natural aspects to the characteristics of that plant. And those are all things that you will typically find when you are growing living soil, is a more vast variety of those terpenes and cannabinoids, all leading into a more well-rounded medicine. Now, also what we're doing here with a soil model is we're able to recycle. It's all going to continue to progress and evolve the way that we're going to be able to continue being more sustainable when it comes to an water osmosis system. Eventually, we have plans of getting into solar electricity. But right now, what we're really focusing on is recycling our soil. And at the moment, we do reuse and we save roughly 1,260 cubic feet of soil from landfill each week. And I will mention, if you look at the West Coast and you look at some living soil models, it's taken to a whole nother level, even than what we're doing. I will also mention one cool thing that stands out about the way that we grow is we grow in these big pig troughs. We don't do single pots for our plants. We put about 10 to 12 in one pig trough. So we are creating that microbiology and biodiversity internally through our soil that's allowing our plants to communicate with each other, but not only that, share nutrients with each other. And so when you do go into our flower rooms, you see that our plants are communicating with one another, which is not something that you'll see as much when they are singly potted. Some of the nutrients that we are using here, this is a solid list of things that we are using, have used, are primarily using, but there are 4 that stand out primarily that I will go over with you here. Now, when you're doing a soil model, you're typically starting with some type of poop. We do use back guano. It's very high in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are the three main nutrients that your cannabis plants are looking and needing of to grow appropriately. So that's going to be the base of our soil. We then follow that up with some pulverized dolomite limestone. And this is going to help with the pH balance of our water. Now, granted, we will balance our pH before we feed our plants. And we have the microbes internally in the soil that are also going to help balance the pH naturally before the plant intakes it. And we also have the dolomite limestone, which is supposed to continuously help balance that pH to what the plant would like it to be at. So pHing your water is important because if you don't pH it appropriately, the plant will not intake nutrients fully, and you'll have nutrient buildup in the soil, which then one leads to unhealthy plants, and two will really affect the flavor and the effects that you'll get from that medicine. So it's very important to make sure, if not the most important, because that's how they're going to intake their nutrients through the watering cycle, that your pH is appropriate. So we really have like 3 safety nets there on the fact that we do it ourselves, the microbes internally in the soil, and on top of that, this dolomite limestone. We do follow that up with some alfalfa meal, which is very, the more I've learned about alfalfa meal, the more I've fallen in love with it and can't wait to just use it simply in my garden at home. This is a nutrient that will release nutrients over time. So these plants, we'll get into the probiotic tea next, but these plants will be getting all this nutrients naturally from the backguano, some of these other things that you see here. But by the time that we're getting to the last few weeks of the cycle of life of these plants, that nutrients might be getting a little, less. There might be less for it to intake. Well, that alfalfa meal is going to kick in towards the last few weeks of the plant's life, and it's going to give it a little nutrient boost. So it releases nutrients over time. Very, very cool and very helpful. And of course, we also have some granular humic acid. This is going to kind of work like a steroid for the plant. Not only does it make the nutrients more bioavailable, but it pretty much makes the plant want to intake more nutrients. So in a sense, it's kind of like a steroid. And we move on to our probiotic tea. Now, I don't have all the necessary reasons why we use all of these ingredients in our probiotic tea, but we do create this probiotic tea with these ingredients, put them in our big water containers that before we feed our plants. The comfrey leaf, the horsetail, shaved grass, white willow bark, turkey rhubarb, wild yam root, more alfalfa meal, more humic acids, more worm castings. And what's really nice is we have the beneficial bacteria and fungi inoculants. In some other living soil models, you might see a lot of mycelium working internally in the soil as well, more in the no-till living soil. We do till our soil a little bit just to re-amend it with different nutrients as we test our soil continuously. But it's very cool that we are using some fungi inoculants as in a sustainable model like this. Again, like I said, on the West Coast, you'll see fungi being used very, very much so in a model like this. So also coming with a model that is more focused on organic methodologies, you're going to find that it's going to be much more labor intensive. So our quality of care that you might not see from a hydro model that is going to be set up on a big, structured system that allows somebody more so to be working in like a control room where they're just waiting for something to kind of, a light to go red and they have to go fix something. We very much have to be in the dirt, in the soil with our hands, in those rooms constantly. And that starts with the fact that we hand water. When you see cocoa models and hydro models, you understand that they are going through systems where maybe they have a drip system for watering, more so in cocoa, and hydro, they're just getting consistent water constantly. So we do hand water our plants. We're testing our soil continuously. And of course, we're creating and feeding our organic tea. And on top of that, we do hand trim our plants. When it comes to the end product, we are always hand trimming our buds. So on top of that, plants really thrive off of CO2. And the more time we spend with these plants, the more CO2 they're even getting from us being in those rooms. So these plants are seeing, continuously on a day-to-day basis, anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes of attention as we hand prune them and are just always in those rooms. This brings us to our harvest cycle. So I do believe that our veg cycle is about 77 days long. I do not have that on here, but from the 77 days in the veg cycle, from clone to veg, we then move into the flowering cycle, which will really only let our plants flower up to 60 days. We, unlike a lot of the bigger grows, some of these other bigger grows might choose these flower rooms very early on, no matter how they yield, how they output, that's going to extraction. Excuse me. Because we're a little bit smaller, typically the week before we harvest, we will go into the rooms. We will see who the breadwinners of those rooms are. Those will be chosen for flower most of the time. The ones that might not have produced to the best of their ability, maybe they still yield well, but they didn't really give the look. And especially when patients are paying anywhere from $60 to $75, they're kind of looking for more of a connoisseur boutique experience. So we want to make sure that the quality of the flower that we're putting on the market, aligns with that mentality. So the plants that are chosen for live resin and extraction in general will be harvested typically on the 56th day. And when we are collecting for live resin specifically, within 30 minutes, those buds are going to be stripped from their stalks and put in vacuum sealed bags and put directly into our freezers. Again, typically at this point, we have a pretty good analytical data. The wains are producing better for what, and it's only getting easier over time. And I'm sure that's for all grows. This brings us to the cure process and packaging. I always find this to be such an interesting topic because you can grow the most beautiful plants in whatever methodology, but if you do not cure your flower appropriately, it's not going to mean a thing. You're going to, do yourself a disservice. You're going to do the patient a disservice, but more so you're going to do the plant a disservice. You're spending all that time growing that plant for, months on end. And if you rush the cure process, it's going to have chlorophyll left over in it, which is going to really affect the flavor and overall the medicinal effect that you should get from it. And on top of that, the moisture content. Typically, if they're not cured appropriately, you will find that they smell like hay, or the smell will just be off. So nobody wants to be paying $60, $75, really any price point, 45 up for flour that's not cured appropriately. And I will say, being in the market and in the industry since the beginning of Pennsylvania, there are a lot of companies that kind of rush the cure process, but I can rest assured and explain to you guys that we do a full month cure. We hang dry for 7 to 10 days to start at 65 to 68 degrees at 40% humidity. That's going to be the very beginning, but then we strip them from their stems. We trim them up, hand trimmed. We place them in these airtight containers for another month. So we did just release on our social media our harvest dates for the rest of the month of May, June, and I believe some into July. And we're getting a lot of feedback from patients on like, oh, well, when will we see these plants? Well, if they are chosen for flower, you probably won't see them for another month based off of that harvest date. So we are all about making sure that we cure appropriately. There's a reason why our flower tends to be the highest, not the highest, but a lot of the times very high testing in terpenes specifically. And a lot of the times you can use a full 1/8 of flour, keep that jar for a few months, open it back up, and it will still smell very fresh. On top of that, we use a bud sorter. So we've gotten to a point where we're using a bud sorter to be able to offer the highest quality 1/8 of flour, on top of being able to offer some small buds and some rough cuts at a little bit of a discounted wholesale price, making the market a little bit, appeasing the market a little bit more, and allowing some patients to afford it in a different sense. We also use sustainable child resistant packaging, and we typically are packaging around 15,000 units a week. This leads into our moisture content. Everybody, from my understanding, most growers are definitely aiming for about 12% moisture with their flower. That's going to be the sticks to the finger. You could plaster it on a window, it won't move. That's typically what you want to see when you're getting flower. Granted, in the state of Pennsylvania, we are not allowed to consume through combustion, so we can't smoke, but we are able to vaporize. So a lot of the times the grows in the state of Pennsylvania are not as worried about their moisture content, as the state kind of pushes us to over dry, yet the market is always asking for much more moist flower. But for some perspective, we tend to lose about 80% of the moisture straight out of the dry room, typically another 10% through the curing process, leaving you with usually 10%. But at this point, we're bouncing around between 11 and 12% pretty frequently. So this leads into the way that we categorize our products. Time has shown, and if you look at the industry of cannabis in our country in a whole, so many of these landrace strains that we're not seeing anymore have been hybridized, and the genetic trees on some of these strains are so long that it's difficult to call anything a true sativa or indica anymore. So in all reality, most strains that we're seeing in the market, and this is across the nation, are very much just all hybrids. So we don't necessarily like to categorize our strains based off of the sativa hybrid and indica model. We very much try to give you examples on the experience we believe you will have from the strains that fall under these categories. And we'll start with the calm line. These are going to be your more heavily sedating strains, better for body and pain relief, and just relaxation in general. So some people might just say the quote unquote indicas, but overall, these will be very appeasing to the body. We have about a third of our strain list falling under this category. And what we do try to do with a lot of our genetics is trying to make sure that we pick genetics that don't have an extremely long genetic tree or a lineage, if you would say. A lot of the strains that we have, like the Coal Creek Kush, the Crippy, they are phenotypes of more original strains that do not have an extremely long lineage. And typically, I think as time goes on, this is my subjective opinion, that the more and more time goes on, the more and more that these over hybridized strains continue coming to market, and everybody likes something new, but there will be a point in time where the market is most likely going to be demanding the original strains where the original medicine came from. Getting a little off topic there, but moving forward. So we get into our enhanced line. These are going to be your more mentally stimulating strains. These will be your more better for daytime. I always recommend, if patients are new to cannabis, specifically THC as a cannabinoid, to steer them clear of this to start. This is going to have some anxiety-inducing effects to people who are not tolerated appropriately. Patients who do have a high tolerance will be able to use these throughout the daytime without getting too mentally stimulated. But we only really have a handful of strains that fall under here. So again, just be wary of really how to utilize this line. We bring this to our Harmony line. These are going to be strains that are going to be easily used for daytime or nighttime. A little bit more subjective in effect. Everybody's body chemistry is a little different. So for example, I use the Archangel as a daytime user. It's very high testing in osmium as a terpene. Osmium reacts very uplifting for me. It helps me kind of move throughout the day, where I have friends that are patients that use it more as a stress relieving strain for the end of the workday, as it helps calm them down a little bit. So this is a line that's kind of playful, not only for newer patients to be able to understand that they shouldn't be overwhelmingly mentally stimulating or too sedating. So finding out exactly how it works best for them is exactly what this line is for. And then for patients who know their tolerance and are very well tolerated, this is a kind of a fun line for them, because it's got a lot of different flavor profiles and just really figuring out what's the best way that they can utilize this as well. I will mention that Archangel strain is very unique to us. There's only one other grow in the whole country that has that Archangel strain, Verde Natural in Colorado. That is where our growing SOP came from, that company specifically. Rebecca Myers, our CEO, she really traveled the country to find the best methodology that she could align her priorities with. And Cassandra Maffey, who is and was the head of cultivation at the time for Verde Natural, hand-bred that strain herself. So we were lucky enough to be bestowed upon the fact that she wanted to give us those genetics as well. So it's a very, very unique strain to us. And like I said, it's very high testing in osmine, which is a terpene that is starting to become a little bit more mainstream, but is a little harder to find. This brings us to our Inspire line. Our Inspire line is what I would call our quote unquote connoisseur line. These tend to have a little bit more of a euphoric and creative effect. So good for patients that are still needing daytime relief, but definitely something that's going to have a little bit of a kick. And again, going to probably really appeal to the creatives who are using cannabis for maybe more than just, let's say, medicinal uses. And of course, we have our Restore line. Everybody typically has a CBD dominant line. This is exactly what ours would be. We're growing a few strains: Cannasu, Harley Sue, Pure Love. We do have a Painkiller XL and a Harley Quinn as well, but we kind of rotate which ones we're focusing on the most. I think Painkiller and the Harley Sue are the ones that we grow the most of at the moment, but you'll really only find our Restore line specifically in cartridges and RSO. We were at one point offering it as flower, but the patient base was having a pretty hard time justifying spending the money that they were on flower for a 1-to-1 ratio balance. So time has changed, and we're really focusing on cartridges and RSO when it comes to our Restore line. So we're going to get into all of the methodologies here on all of our extracted based products. We got some in-depth stuff to talk about. So we start with all the cartridges, and we'll start with the burst line. We're kind of going to go from the bottom of the ladder to the top of the ladder, specifically when we're talking about cartridges here. We wanted to come to market with something that was a little bit more affordable, a little bit more obtainable, to compete with some other companies that have been doing very similar methodologies when it comes to what this is. And this is going to be a distillate-based cartridge with non-cannabis derived terpenes. So without naming any names, there's a handful of other grows in the state that are doing this. They tend to retail for around $40 to $50. Great option for patients. Typically, in my opinion, I find this to be kind of a tripwire product for patients. We do use a third-party company called Sweet Terps. Rest assured, there are no PG, VG, PEG, vitamin E, or coconut oil in there. All things that were very concerning during the lipid lung phase, this past year or two, during also kind of everything coming out with COVID. So hard to 100% tell what the main issues were with this, but nonetheless, black market cartridges, don't trust them. You don't know what's in them. But I can, again, rest assured, knowing that there are none of those components in here, but you'll still find very similar terpenes, all the same terpenes that you'll find from cannabis-derived plants. But the fact that these are non-cannabis-derived terpenes typically lead to a little bit of a different flavor profile. I'd like to say subjectively, again, someone who has a palate's been using cannabis for over 10 years, and plenty of other people who really have a palate, you can tell the difference between a non-cannabis derived terpene product and a true cannabis derived terpene product. So not, maybe the most medicinal on the market. It definitely works for some patients, and that's wonderful. But like I said, it's kind of like a tripwire product. If patients really like the burst line, imagine what an extra $10, $15 would do for them to get something with reintroduce live terpenes into it. And again, subjectively, in my opinion, you find a little bit more of a more well-rounded medicinal effect when you are using a cannabis-derived terpene product. But again, great to have this on the market. They get eaten up every time we put them out. We've really only put them out once or twice, but they typically fly off the shelves within a day or two. So we get into Delta 8, and I'm sure, you guys have probably all heard about Delta 8. It's a huge deal right now in the hemp world. CBD, hemp-derived just products, cannabinoids in general. And a few states are starting to really, shut that down. I think Illinois specifically has come out, and they're starting to not allow hemp-derived Delta 8 in any stores. which is okay in my personal opinion. Again, Delta-8 that is derived from hemp is not going to be as medicinal as Delta-8 derived from true cannabis plants. It's just genetically inferior compared to the cannabis plant. So what is Delta-8? Well, it's an isomer of Delta-9, and it's very helpful for analgesic, appetite stimulation, nausea, and pain relieving properties. When I was at the dispensary, cancer patients and people who just had digestion issues were typically the main people coming to grab this type of product. What really stands out about Delta-8, though, is the fact that it's 2/3 as psychoactive as Delta-9. This is very interesting and also very nice to have because it's a little bit more appealing to patients who might be coming from a high CBD regimen. While I was at the dispensary, not only did we focus on what it really helped with, but patients who were, again, coming off of maybe a 1-to-1 ratio of THC to CBD wasn't really doing it for them anymore, wasn't cost efficient for them. All right, it's pretty obvious you need to start moving into higher THC product. Delta-8 is the perfect stepping stone before they get to Delta-9 to allow them to kind of have a little bit more of a palatable experience with it. Not only that, found that it really worked well for people who needed something during the workday that didn't maybe have the tolerance to handle something that would give a little extra kick that a Delta-9 product would give. So I even used them during the workday. It helped give me a little bit more tunnel vision. I always think and express that Delta-9 usually gives me more daydreamy effects than it does necessarily help me focus in on what I'm doing. So Delta-8 has a plethora of options to use it for, but it kind of fits perfectly in the ladder of tolerance for a lot of different patients. Of course, it is a distillate-based product, reintroduced with live terpenes though, so you're going to get a much more medicinal-based experience from this product overall. But we'll talk a little bit about the proprietary blend that we use. We call it Delta Dust, which is just reacting. It's basically the reaction that mimics the aging process of Delta-9. So we're oxidizing the compound, which then turns it into Delta-8. I will mention that we typically lose about 20% of our yield when we do choose to do this, putting Delta-8 at a little bit higher of a price point in the market. So we do usually have these cartridges retailing around $55 to $60. Excuse me. All right, and we get into Delta-9. Typically the most well-known and probably most well-loved cannabinoid out there, besides maybe CBD itself. This is the typical THC compound that you're going to find in pretty much all cannabis products. Nothing really out of the ordinary here. Typical extraction process with distillate. Again, we are reintroducing live terpenes into this product, allowing patients to have again, much more well-rounded medicinal experience. And as you can see so far, from the burst to the Delta-8 to the Delta-9, excuse me, it is kind of a ladder when it comes to tolerance and palate. I'm going to take a quick drink of water. Give me 1 second. Oh. All right. So this is where we get into the serious methodologies and what we're doing. We do a hydrocarbon extraction model for our extracts. We use a model that's being used for over 50 years in the food industry, so it's been tested, it's safe. We very much believe what we're doing is 100% okay. What we're using is a 70% butane to a 30% propane. Really, why are we using these two different solvents? Well, propane, for one, is going to help strip the cannabinoids and terpenes from the plant material much quicker than a CO2 would, and typically a lot more efficiently than CO2 would. And the propane only adds to that fact. So using them together really helps strip them quickly and effectively. And the propane itself also kind of helps clean up the end product, making it a little bit more appealing in color. Typically, when you're looking for live resins, just extracts in general, everyone's so addicted to this translucent gold color. And the clearer the gold color, the better. And that's really what's working for us. So Why do we really use butane over CO2? Well, it starts with the fact that we can get about a cycle done within 60 minutes, where if we chose to do supercritical CO2 extraction, it would take us about 6 to 10 hours. So we have on record done about 13 runs in one day, which really works for us. We find we get larger yields, we get less waste. We yield about an extra 14 to 30% by using butane over CO2. And this hydrocarbon extraction model on top of the living soil that we're doing, which the living soil method is typically a lot more focused on your terpene profiles, making sure that the plant is as flavorful, has the best flavonoids and terpenes possible. This is going to be very complementary using butane to the fact that we're growing like that. This is only going to help enhance and express the fact that we are growing more organically, and you will be able to taste that in these extracted products. So again, we really use the butane and propane together to really help strip the plants more efficiently, and overall it helps just clean up and make a much more appealing looking product that is much more desired on the market. This brings us to our live resin. So I always mention that we're in a market that is so new and it's still in its infancy that there's a lack of standardization because of the lack of federal law. This allows a lot of companies to, market things that might not be necessarily correct. You will see a lot of people doing live this, live that, maybe saying something's a live resin when really it's something similar to like our Delta 8 and Delta 9, where it's a distillate base and has live terpenes reintroduced to it, not necessarily an authentic live resin. What is an authentic live resin? Well, we're going to talk about it right here. So first and foremost, we go through that harvest process, right? Within 30 minutes of us stripping or cutting the plants down, they are then stripped from their stems. They're put in those vacuum sealed bags or put directly in the freezer. When you're doing live resins, whether it's cartridges, concentrates, the fact that you're doing that quickly, you're really bypassing the curing process. So you're focusing on retaining all the monoterpenes. Those monoterpenes are going to be the terpenes that are probably most well known, being your limonene, caryophyllene, terpinolene, pinene, so on and so on. Typically like the top 10 or 15 that if you looked at anybody's products, the back of the labels, it's going to have like the same exact terpenes, just different percentiles. So that's what you're really focusing on with live terpenes, is just as fresh as possible. Live products. So first and foremost, we do not use any additives or third-party terpenes in this process. We do this using the fresh frozen material that we have collected. We will go through our hydrocarbon extraction process, which will strip the plant of its, terpenes and cannabinoids. We then put those, we collect them in these mason jars, which we will then put in an oven. That oven will not necessarily be hot enough to activate any cannabinoids, but it will be hot enough that you'll find the THC will crystallize on the bottom, and the terpenes will separate on the top, in which we will then decant out the terpenes. We will put the THCA crystallization that has been produced on the bottom back on a hot plate. That hot plate will basically melt down the THCA to a viscosity that will be able to be put back into a cartridge. But at the same time, we learned, not necessarily the hard way, but early in, we were trying to retain as much THCA, because typically your live products, especially with your concentrate specifically, they're only going to be THCA. Through heating, you will activate that product yourself, and it will turn into THC. So a live product, in a sense, should always have, some type of THCA percentile in it. But we found that the higher we had our THCA percentile with our live resin cartridges, the more crystallization issues we were having with our cartridges. So it's very normal, and pretty much we're not the only ones. When you see a live resin cartridge, you will find that it will be much higher testing in THC, and there might be a very limited amount of THCA left over in it. That's okay. It's really the process in which we're making it that matters, is being more authentic to the plant and not using any additives or third-party products. So it's okay if it's not necessarily testing very high in THCA. So that's really what creates that homogeneous product and really gives you the most authentic product that you really can get out of the plant when it comes to an extraction process. And so we'll move on to concentrates here. Cured resin is going to be a concentrate. So we do a few different consistencies. Typically you see waxes, sugars, maybe some sauces from time to time. These are going to be a lot more brown in color. Typically they're not as appealing to patients because of the color, but these are going to go through the curing process, the hang dry process. We're going to cure them for a month. What a lot of people overlook when it comes to cured resins, people think it's a lesser product when in all reality, it actually has more potential to be much more medicinal than a live resin product does. Because it's being cured, you're finding that it's going to have more than just those monoterpenes in the end product. And when you're getting more terpenes, it's going to be a lot more comparable to the complexities of like wine tasting than live resin actually will be. Live resin will be extremely flavorful, fresh, but cured resins, again, for the sommeliers out there, would be much more comparable to that. And overall, I think a lot of patients and people typically sleep on the cured resins and don't understand that this actually has a much higher potential to be much more well-rounded in a medicinal effect than a live resin necessarily does. So we tend to do these quite frequently. We have started doing grams. They tend to sell around $80 to $75 for a gram of cured resin from us. And again, I can't, express enough the fact that I really think that cured resins are where it's at, even though the market doesn't necessarily say so. Bringing us to live resin. So again, it's very similar to our cartridges, going to be very much focused on the monoterpenes, but what really stands out here is the fact that the color and the consistencies that you'll find from making live resins typically are much more appealing on the market. So we do a beach sand, and I'll get into the beach sand a little bit more on the next slide. But what we're really focusing on right now are butter, sauces, and sugars. You might find waxes from time to time. But again, very similar to the live resins, they tend to be very appealing in color. And again, the flavor being those monoterpenes, being just a different mix of those top 15 to 10 terpenes that you typically see. Give patients, a flavor profile that definitely kind of stands out a little bit more. It's easier to notice the flavor of a live resin because it tends to be so much more pungent, but someone who has a very well aged palate will be able to really pick through more of a cured resin than maybe a live resin. So we're going to talk beach sands here. We do THCA isolate. THCA isolate is the same process through the fresh frozen that we would use our live resins for. We decant the terpenes and we wash the THCA using heptane. That pretty much takes all the other cannabinoids and terpenes away from the product, leaving you with just the THCA. This is okay. I mean, this is definitely something that the patient base in the state reacts very well to. It's very well sought out. It tends to be more of a complementary product than necessarily a medicine by itself. You'll find a lot of patients maybe sprinkling this THCA isolate, which we, some companies just call sand, THCA sand, on their flower to enhance the potency of their flower, or maybe they have a concentrate that's not very high testing in THCA, but maybe has a good terpene profile. They want to enhance that product to be a little bit more well-rounded as well. So there are patients who will use this by themselves. There are some symptoms that call for THCA by itself. So it has its place in the market, but I would say probably 90% of the time you're finding patients using this as an enhancing product. This is why we came to the market with the beach sand. Beach sand is very similar to THCA isolate, except we don't wash it totally with heptane. We make sure that it is very high testing. Typically your THCA isolate is going to test 90% or higher in THCA. So it's very, very potent. Our beach sand is very similar. It's going to also test about 90% or higher in THCA. It might not be as granular as what you're looking at right here. But we also make sure that there's some of a terpene profile left over. So it tends to have more of a beach sand look to it, a little bit more color to it. And we wanted to do this because, yes, it's very high testing still. It's something that you could definitely enhance any other product with, but it's going to be much more medicinal by itself rather than just a THCA isolate itself, because it has some terpenes left over in it, giving you a potential to have a much more well-rounded medicinal experience and might not needing to, use it with anything else. So it's a kind of a nice little in-between besides just a THCA isolate and then just some of the other concentrates out there on the market. All right, as we start to really finish up here, we have a handful of slides left. We do tinctures. We don't do really anything out of the ordinary. I think the only company out of the whole state that's doing a different base besides MCT oil are actually these guys at Kind Tree with the Hope tinctures. I do believe, Michelle, Franmar, you guys could probably tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe you guys use olive oil in that, where I'm pretty sure the rest of the market and all the other tinctures used are MCT oil. So we're not really doing anything out of the ordinary. Really just focused on strain specific options here. I will mention, a lot of different companies do blends. I really like what these guys do at Kind Tree with their Shine and Soothe, Dream tinctures, as they do really nice ratio balances for patients of CBD to THC, which we don't see a lot from a lot of the other companies. But what you're finding from us, because a lot of these other companies are doing blends constantly, not necessarily ratio blends, but just blends of a bunch of different strains all together, you find some inconsistency sometimes in your dosing, regardless if you know that you only need to use maybe one full dropper. From batch to batch, sometimes effects can change a little bit. So we really try to focus on doing strain specific tinctures, giving some consistency to patients. If they know the Banana Kush tincture worked well for them, they know exactly what to expect every time that they get that Banana Kush tincture. So that's really where our main focus is right now. You will find some CBD dominant. We did just do just CBD by itself, but typically we're trying to release more of our strain specific CBD dominant strains also. And from time to time, very rarely will you find Delta 8 come from us in a tincture as well. This brings us to our last slide. Of course, we do RSO, Rick Simpson oil. We try to follow Rick Simpson's methodology to a T. You will find across the board, not every company doing RSOs doing Rick Simpson's model. I found out yesterday that Grassroots RSOs actually extracted using butane, which is interesting. I'm not trying to bash them, but I don't know if that would necessarily be considered a RSO, or, overall, because they're using butane. So we do use ethanol. This is going to strip the plant from pretty much everything. We typically, keep it in freezing temperatures for about 24 to 48 hours, sometimes even 3 days. It's really going to help separate the fats and the lipids from the solution, in which we will then filter out, and the ethanol will be purged, leaving you with a decarbonated product being RSO, meaning that the THCA has already been activated to THC, allowing the patient to orally take that without needing to necessarily bake it in a product, and can definitely, find the medicinal effects they need out of that. Now, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of patients who will use this for baking as well. But if you're going to recommend a patient using RSO and they don't want to take it straight, because some people are turned off by the flavor and the consistency and the stickiness that it gets in their mouth, and they want to bake with it, there are plenty of recipes online, obviously, but they're going to have to go slow and low. So low temperatures for a longer period of time. That way you're not totally degrading and destroying the THC that's already activated. I will also mention, because we do follow Rick Simpson's model to a T, our RSO tends to be a lot thicker in consistency. There's a lot of different viscosities of RSO in the market. That's only going to be totally understood based off of the methodologies in which other companies use, in which I don't have. But we find that our RSO is extremely thick because it's very terpene rich, very hard to push out. So we always express to patients to run it under hot water before using it, but also if they're going to run it under hot water, to understand that it's going to come out very quickly because the viscosity will change. And too many times have I had patients have a hard time pushing it out, run it under hot water, and end up pushing the whole gram out and wasting a lot. So I will also mention some genetics and strains have a little bit of a different color consistency. Most of the time, you're going to find this really dark black, like tar looking product. We have found that some of our CBD strains, and sometimes when we do strain mixtures, the product comes out looking a little bit more like distillate, so much more clear in color. Anytime patients have any concerns, if they get an RSO like that and they're like, what is this? We are more than happy to provide the COAs to show proof that it was tested as an RSO, it passed testing as an RSO, and it really is an RSO. So with that being said, that is the end of the presentation that I have for you all. I will mention, because I know that there are going to be some questions that Michelle's going to, give me here. If there's anything I feel like I cannot answer 100% accurate without spreading misinformation to you guys, I would just ask to receive an email and make sure that I have gotten the right information from our department heads before getting back to you on those questions. But thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, TJ. We appreciate it. That was an awesome, thorough presentation. Earlier in the presentation, we did have a question come through about Delta 8, but then you so thoroughly answered it that we could disregard that one. So I don't see any other questions, but Franmar, do you have any questions or do you have anything to add to what TJ? I figured that, that's why I asked.
So let's stay on the Delta 8 topic, because I'll be honest, this is still a slight mystery to some of us pharmacists, and we're still, jury's still out on how we feel. Have you gotten feedback from patients that if they consume Delta 8 via inhalation versus orally, like through a tincture, that they are going to get totally different types of reactions?
So there's a reason we have, and I probably should just update my PowerPoint. I apologize for not doing so before this. The reason we really haven't been doing Delta 8 in tincture form, we did at one point. The question started getting asked, and because we aren't doing a case study, we have stopped producing it. But when you ingest anything, whether it's Delta 9, Delta 8, through your ingestion process, it's going to turn into 11-hydroxy. So does it matter if it's a Delta 8 tincture necessarily? That's where we're at. And because we aren't doing a case study on it yet, we have stopped production of the Delta 8 tincture. So, naturally, without really thinking too hard about it, I wouldn't think that it would matter. Hence why, again, we kind of have stopped with the Delta 8 tincture. Inhalation wise, though, you will see a difference in comparison to Delta 9, Delta 8. I can subjectively say from experience, it's quite obvious. But I also think that the patient base has expressed that based off of reviews and effects that people are finding. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what we're hearing too, just different. Depending on the route of administration, different types of reactions. So sometimes it's a little difficult to recommend certain things when you're not exactly sure to tell them, like, good luck.
Well, it's also
rather than give them a little more specifics of what's going to go down.
And that's why I also state, the Delta 8 coming from hemp compared to actual cannabis is a big conversation. And that's the problem, is that Delta 8 is so easily available right now in any CBD shop. I think you can almost get it at like Walmart right now or something like that, I would never want to push a patient towards hemp-derived Delta 8, also just because of the murky water in which it is falling in that industry alone. And unfortunately, our medical market isn't producing a lot of Delta 8. So it's really only pushing them towards hemp-derived Delta 8. And I know we do Delta 8 from time to time. I think Holistic does from time to time. Haven't really seen anybody else come out with the market from it. But as we're starting to see the feds, come down on hemp-derived Delta 8, I have already started talking internally with our sales team and our production team that there's going to be a demand, as there already is a mild demand for Delta 8 in our market, most likely.
Awesome, thank you.
Of course.
Do any of the physicians that are on have any questions?
I didn't see any more come through.
TJ, are there anything, any new items or products to come between now and the end of 2021 that you're working on, whether it's in like quarter 2 or quarter 3, quarter 4?
So Earlier in the year, I was really on top of the company about getting RSO capsules out to the market because we were going to do strain-specific RSO caps. We were going to start competing with grassroots. We were going to come at a much lower price point for a 50 milligram 10 pack. I think we were going to be coming around $60, which I think is almost 20 to 10 to somewhere between 10 and $20 less than what the market was carrying theirs at. And we had worked on it. Right now, there's so much focus internally on our Ohio grow getting up and running that I know our department heads are stressed to the fullest potential that they possibly could be. So it's kind of been overlooked and on hold at the moment. We have R&D'd a few different capsules, different sizes. I think when we do come to market with it, there will be a 50 milligram option, a 25 or a 30 milligram option, and potentially a 10 milligram option. Besides that, the strains that I mentioned at the beginning that we popped, were all popped not only because we wanted to have some new genetics on the market, but they were chosen specifically because we have plans as time goes on, and I doubt it will be in 2021 with the way things are going right now, but we have plans of getting a solventless department up and running to do, again, solventless concentrates, water hash. We're not going to do necessarily flower rosin. We're going to go all the way to the highest quality solventless products that you will probably see on the West Coast. That is much more of a connoisseur based type of product, typically very, very pricey, but also pretty much the most authentic and healthiest ways to consume an extracted product in a sense. So we're looking at potentially doing that down the road, but I'm hoping RSO capsules will be right around the corner. I know I use them religiously, so I'm waiting just for my own personal benefit on top of, I know that the patient base would love to find some more consistency, and the fact that we do a lot of strain specific RSO, I also know is praised quite heavily in the market.
Now you said water hash. Is that the same? I think I know it as bubble hash. Is that
bubble hash, water hash?
I'll make sure I'm on the same page.
Yeah, solventless is, I get taught by some of our internal guys in cultivation and extraction, because I'm not a big concentrate guy myself, but I've learned all about the solventless world. And there are just such minute differences and definitions of that, of what bubble hash might be. Bubble hash is water hash, but then there's like different, are you doing the water hash, then, letting things dry, and then are you pressing the dry sift? Like there's so many different methods of doing solventless. But I really think that we're not going to just do necessarily flower rosin, which would be considered solventless. We're going to do water hash, which is typically more of the top of the line when it comes to solventless.
Yeah, I know. We saw it once, I believe, back in 2018 when the program started
right?
off. Yeah. They did a bubble hash, and I know it was very popular. Couldn't really tell because of, because the idea that it was solventless, or because it was the new shiny thing that got introduced.
Yeah, I'll
because, we didn't have a lot of products back in 2018.
Okay. It didn't do solventless the best, the best justice, but I've also seen G-Leaf has kind of done a tier system. They do a flower rosin, a dry sift rosin, which is pretty much just collecting keef and then pressing that. And then they've done a live hash rosin, which a live hash rosin is going to be water hash. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
Wonderful.
All my concentrate stuff.
Thank you, Jay. It looks like we're at time and we don't have any more questions. So thank you again. We really appreciate your time, your presentation, all of it. Again, if any of the physicians have questions for TJ after the presentation, you can reach out to us and we can provide you with his email address. And for the physicians, this session is being recorded and it will be posted onto our website and YouTube page. So we will send that information out to you when that is posted. So thank you again, and
thank you for participating in our 9-part series. We're wrapping it up, so this is great.
Thank you, ladies from the Apothecarium, Kind Tree in general, for just giving, growers and people like myself the platform to be able to talk about these things and get this information out there.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.